Welcome back, everyone. We're diving back into To Kill a Mockingbird this time.
Still with you.
And today, it's chapter 23.
Oh, this is a good one.
It is, isn't it? The trial's done. Tom Robinson, well, you know what happened there. But now it's like the whole Finch family, especially Jem, they're still reeling.
Yeah, definitely. You really start to see the aftershocks, you know? We're shifting from like all that courtroom drama to something a bit more, I guess, intimate. We get to peek into how this experience sort of shatters Jem's childhood and forces him to face some really complex stuff like justice, racism, and all the prejudice swirling around him.
Yeah, and it starts off with this scene outside the post office that honestly gives me chills every time I read it.
Bob Ewell.
Yeah, Bob Ewell confronting Atticus, spits in his face, hurls threats. You can practically feel the rage radiating off him. It's unsettling.
I get goosebumps just thinking about it.
Me too. But what's interesting is how Atticus reacts. Or doesn't react, actually.
Right. He just like calmly wipes his face and walks away.
Exactly. It's like he was expecting it somehow. Which, I don't know, is almost more unsettling. What do you make of that?
That, I think, is Harper Lee showing us how deeply Atticus understands Bob Ewell. Think about it. Atticus spent that whole trial picking apart Ewell's character, exposing his lies, showing everyone how cruel he could be. He knows Ewell.
She really does.
Deep down. And he knows that this rage, this need to lash out comes from a place of, well, a toxic mix of pride and ignorance. Ewell needs to feel superior, you know, especially after being humiliated in court.
So by not reacting, Atticus is actually being strategic, protecting himself.
Absolutely. And others, he knows, engaging would just escalate things, make Ewell even more volatile. It's really brilliant.
But then you have Aunt Alexandra, who has a totally different take on the whole thing. She's terrified of Bob Ewell, wants Atticus to take those threats seriously.
Oh, completely different. In Alexandra, she represents that fear and prejudice that's just baked into Maycomb. Her world is all about categories. Good folks, trash, and anyone who disrupts the status quo.
Right, it's all very black and white for her.
Exactly. And her fear of Ewell, it's partly because he's unpredictable, sure, but also because she looks down on those poor white families like the Cunninghams. She sees them as beneath her.
Oh, totally. Remember when she forbids Scout from inviting Walter over?
Oh, yeah. Classic Aunt Alexandra. More rigid social boundaries. It's so revealing.
And right in the middle of all this is Jem, who's trying to wrap his head around the verdict. The whole thing seems to have just shattered his faith in the justice system.
Totally understandable, though. Poor Jem goes into that trial with such idealism. He believes fairness will win, the truth will come out, and then he sees what happens.
He even says they should just get rid of juries.
Right. It's heartbreaking, but you get it. That outburst, it's not just frustration. It's like he's desperately searching for some easy fix for a problem that's so deeply rooted.
And bless Atticus, ever the patient teacher, he tries to help Jem through it. Explains the juries aren't inherently bad. It's just that they're made up of people with their own biases and prejudices.
Right, and he even says it took a thunderbolt to get even one Cunningham juror to consider acquitting Tom.
I know, I always think a thunderbolt? Is that hope? Or is Atticus just, I don't know, clutching at straws?
That is such a good question. And it actually leads us to one of the most interesting parts of this chapter, I think. We have all this despair, but then there are these tiny hints of change, you know? Like the Cunninghams.
The Cunninghams, yeah.
They're the poorest of the poor whites in Maycomb. Aunt Alexandra looks down on them. But one of them was on the jury, and they actually lean towards not guilty at first.
Wow, so when Atticus calls that a shadow of the beginning, he's being
optimistic.
Maybe a little.
Possibly. But you have to remember, Atticus, he always tries to see the good in people, even when they're at their worst. That little act of defiance, even if it was crushed by societal pressure in the end, it gives him hope.
Right.
He really believes that change is possible, even if it's slow and gradual. And he wants Jem to believe that, too.
It's fascinating how Lee puts that conversation about the jury right next to Atticus's thoughts on the death penalty. He says circumstantial evidence shouldn't be enough to justify taking a life.
Yeah.
I mean, is that kind of a critique of the very system he's defending to Jem?
Ooh, that's insightful. See, Atticus is all about principles. His stance on the death penalty, it shows his deep respect for human life, no matter who you are, what your background is. And he's really bothered by the fact that mistakes can happen, especially when you have racial prejudice influencing things.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, even if we try to have a fair trial, are we really equipped to decide who lives and dies based on evidence that might be flawed?
It's a question that sticks with you,
It really does.
and it's relevant even today.
Yeah.
Then there's this incredibly powerful moment. Atticus, he just lets loose about racism. He calls out those, what does he say? Low-grade white men.
Yes.
Those who prey on black people.
This is where we see Atticus's calm facade crack a little. He's not just talking legal strategy here. He's expressing just how disgusted he is by the systemic oppression, and he's doing it in front of his kids.
It's like he's not trying to protect them from it anymore.
Exactly. He's preparing them to confront it.
To be the ones who change things.
Exactly. And it ties back to what he said about the Cunninghams. Even though prejudice is so ingrained, he believes hearts and minds can change, and he's planting that seed of belief in Jem and Scout.
It's such a powerful message. And then we see Jem trying to process everything that's happened. He starts categorizing people and make them, like he's trying to build a new framework for understanding this world that's suddenly so complex and unfair.
Yeah, it shows how he's starting to understand social hierarchy. He's moving past these simple ideas of good and bad and realizing that people's actions are often shaped by things they can't control.
And he really struggles to define what makes our kind of folks different from the Cunninghams or the Ewells. Almost like he's questioning those distinctions altogether.
Yeah, like maybe he's realizing those categories are just made up, arbitrary.
Right, like maybe they don't really mean anything.
I think that's exactly what he's doing. You can see how his awareness is growing, how he's realizing how complicated people are, and that those neat categories, they don't really hold up.
And then comes this really insightful but kind of sad conclusion he makes about Boo Radley. He thinks maybe Boo stays inside because he wants to avoid all the ugliness of the world, all the prejudice. Like he finally gets why Boo isolates himself.
Yeah, not because he's strange or anything, but to protect himself.
Exactly. And it's like Jem sees a bit of himself in Boo now, someone who's been hurt by all that judgment.
It is. It's kind of heartwarming and kind of tragic at the same time. It's like facing injustice himself has opened Jem's eyes to how much other people are suffering, even those he used to be scared of.
You really see Jem's character growing here.
Don't you? He's not just letting these bad experiences get to him. He's using them to understand what it means to be human. He's starting to see things from the perspective of those who are different, who don't fit in.
It makes Boo Radley even more
Poignant.
Yeah, that's the word. He's like a symbol of all the people who've been hurt by prejudice, who've had to hide themselves away.
Exactly. And it really underlines what Lee is saying about prejudice, how insidious it is. It's not always about those big, obvious acts of discrimination. It's also about the subtle ways people get silenced and pushed aside just for being different.
It really makes you think. This whole chapter, it feels like a little snapshot of all the big themes running through the book.
Oh, totally. Justice, racism, coming of age, and just trying to hold on to hope in a world that can be so cruel.
And Lee does such a brilliant job of using Jem's perspective to guide us through it all.
She really does. We're seeing the world as he sees it, feeling his confusion, his anger, and that gradual realization that the world is not a fair place.
And you're right there with him on that emotional roller coaster.
It's what makes the story so powerful, so affecting.
Yeah, it's not just watching from a distance. You're actually feeling it all with Jem. And then at the very end of the chapter, he retreats to his room. It's like this young boy who's just been smacked in the face by how hard the adult world can be, and he just needs to escape back to.
The safety of childhood
Yeah.
makes you wonder, doesn't it? How is this going to change him going forward? Is he going to become cynical, or is this going to fire him up to fight for a better world?
Ooh, good question. It definitely makes you think. It makes you look back on your own experiences, those times when you faced injustice and how they shaped you. Makes you wonder if this is Lee saying something about growing up, especially in a place like Mako, where prejudice is just everywhere.
That's what makes To Kill a Mockingbird so brilliant, right? It doesn't shy away from the tough stuff. We're forced to confront these questions right alongside Jem and Scout. It's like a reminder that growing up isn't just about getting older. It's about wrestling with these really complicated moral issues and figuring out your own sense of what's right and wrong, even when the world around you keeps falling short.
It's like what Atticus says, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view until you climb into his skin and walk around in it.
Exactly. And Jim, he's starting to do that. He's trying to see the world through the eyes of the people who've been pushed aside, misunderstood.
He is.
And that's the first step, isn't it? Towards empathy, towards truly understanding others. It's the foundation for building a world that's more just, more compassionate. And if Jim can learn this so young, in the middle of all this turmoil, this trial,
Gives you hope.
it does, doesn't it? A little glimmer of light.
Yeah. Even though, I mean, it's not a happy ending. Bob Ewell's still out there, angry. But there's this sense of possibility, maybe.
Definitely. Because Jim's growing, his understanding is changing, it suggests that change is possible, even if it's slow.
It does. This chapter, it's not neat and tidy, you know. It leaves you with questions. Makes you think about your own role in things.
It does. It challenges you to look at your own biases, how you might be contributing to systems that are unfair.
It reminds you that To Kill a Mockingbird isn't just some story set way back when in the South. It's about being human.
It is. It's about the struggle for justice, for equality, and that's a story that's always relevant.
Absolutely. So as you keep reading, pay attention to Jem. How does he deal with all of this? Does his empathy lead him to fight for change? Or does he retreat?
Such good questions to think about.
They are. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Chapter 23. It's a chapter that stays with you, makes you think.
Definitely does.
Until next time, keep reading.